McMoran, symbol FCX, number 9, Alcoa, symbol AA, and the number 10 position held down by Target, aka Target, symbol TGT. Now, family members and listeners alike, when we look at the markets in their current state, I'm talking about that Dow, that S&P, and that NASDAQ, and we see it continually hit high after high after high, with more and more people plummeting into the market and just investing one-tunnelly, investing wildly, and buying positions and driving the markets up as a whole. Well, that harkens me back to a story that is often told about Joe Kennedy. That's right, the patriarch of the Kennedy family. And Joe was a very, very savvy investor on Wall Street. Now, he made his money through other ways and means, okay, that we won't go into here inside the classroom with our Walls radio broadcast. We're just going to stick to the Wall Street and his earnings from Wall Street. And he was known as a very, very prolific and very, very successful Wall Street trader. And there's a famous market story about Mr. Kennedy, a uber wealthy guy back in the day, and the father of JFK. And he exited the stock market just in the nick of time after a shoe shine boy on the streets of New York gave him some stock picks. So he was on his way to his Wall Street office, stopped to get his shoe shine early one morning, and the shoe shine boy was giving this uber wealthy, trading and investing savvy Wall Streeter information on picks. Well, Kennedy figured that when the shoe shine boy has tips to give a Wall Street uber wealthy trader and investor, then the market is too popular for its own good, and it's time to sell, because people who are constantly putting money in the market have made the wealth of the uber wealthy rise. But everything that rises must indeed fall. Kennedy got out just before the famed 1929 stock market crash. Family members, we have something that is presenting itself in a similar matter today. Not so much that we are headed for a stock market crash, the likes of the 1929 stock market crash, which led to the Great Depression here stateside. No, but what we do have is a overly inflated U.S. market with highs being met day after day via the top 3 major U.S. indexes, talking about that Dow, that S&P, and that NASDAQ. And you'd be well advised to see now what others see eventually, and look at various ways and means of getting P.A.I.D, utilizing our powerful strategies and techniques when the market moves to the downside, because it certainly will. All of this actualized profit that's in the market can only be liquidated, can only be monetized by and through the selling of market positions. And when a sell-off occurs, the market has to go to the downside. Now, one very, very prominent hedge fund manager was on Bloomberg earlier today, and he says he is long, listen to this, he's long on shorting the S&P 500. Once again, he's long on shorting the S&P 500, which means he's expecting the S&P 500 to fall. So he's taking the appropriate positions that will rise when that occurs, and he's planning on getting P.A.I.D as the market sells off. Family members, some of the most brilliant minds on Wall Street and around the world, they're preparing themselves for the inevitable sell-off. And when that occurs, people who are sitting around waiting for the market to rebound, they only have their 401k plan or their retirement plan tied to the markets, and thus that they only get paid when the market moves to the upside. They are going to have a bloodbath. And for those people who are living off of and banking, excuse the pun, on Social Security, well, their future is even more bleak. The Republican Party's attempts to fix the Affordable Care Act, talking about Obamacare, have been nothing short of disastrous. And if it weren't for the seriousness of the issue, it would be downright hilarious. Now listen to me closely, get into this Social Security thing. Now whether you agree the government has a role in healthcare or not, it should be clear to everyone that the federal government has no idea how to solve the myriad of problems they themselves create. Now, incompetent Washington bureaucrats have only made healthcare worse in America. And sadly, these same bureaucrats will do everything in their power to maintain the status quo. But their incompetence isn't just regulated to the healthcare debate. No. The problems in healthcare mirror the problems of the Social Security. Although Social Security's unfunded liabilities are orders of magnitude the size of scope of healthcare, unfortunately, the end result will be the same. Family members and listeners alike, listen to me very closely, for you're about to go through a reality check. And we're going to talk about social insecurity. A few weeks ago, the Social Security Board of Trustees released their annual report on the health of Social Security. The results should concern every American, but none more than Americans born after the year 1970. Listen to me. The results should concern every American, but none more so than Americans born after the year 1970. Let me explain. The report showed that 171 million Americans, or roughly half the population of America, paid into the program via their FICA taxes in 2016. And together, they paid taxes totaling $869 billion to Social Security last year. Now, on the other side are the recipients of Social Security benefits. These include American retirees as well as those collecting survivor and disability benefits. Now, last year, there were more than 61 million people on the receiving end of Social Security. And here's where the problem starts. You see, the 61 million people receiving benefits collected more than $922 billion, or $53 billion more than the government collected in taxes. Now, how does that work? Now, to offset this difference, the government sold $88 billion in Treasury securities. Now, next year, the trustees expect the deficit to grow to $60 billion. Now, that will require the issuance of another roughly $100 billion in Treasury bonds. In other words, the national debt is growing because of Social Security, something our progressive friends on the left deny with fervor, but our ultra-conservative friends on the right refuse to fix as well. Now, why is this? Well, many have been misled to believe that the trust fund holds enough money to offset Social Security's deficits because of what is going on as it relates to retiring baby boomers. They believe the fund, talking about the trust fund, will guarantee benefits until the year 2034. But here's why that's wrong. You see, the Social Security Trust Fund is nothing more than a financial ledger detailing the cumulative surpluses over the life of the program. To grasp this, you need to understand the 1937 Supreme Court ruling on Havering versus Davis. Write that down. This is very interesting what I'm telling you, and it will affect your life. The 1937 Supreme Court ruling on Havering, spelled Helvering versus Davis. Now, in that particular case, the Supreme Court ruled that Social Security was not a contributory insurance program. The court ruled, quote, the proceeds of both the employee and the employer taxes are to be paid into the Treasury like any other internal revenue generally and are not earmarked in any way, end quote. Now, let me break that down to you. In other words, politicians have been free to use FICA taxes to fund any government program they choose, and they violate no laws by doing so. FICA taxes have never been set aside to pay the future claims of retirees. The program is nothing more than a payroll tax on employees and a welfare program for its recipients. So what about the trust fund, you might ask? I'm glad you asked. Currently, the trust fund claims to hold assets worth about $2.8 trillion. Now, if these were indeed marketable assets, they would be sufficient to fund the program's deficits without raising the national debt. But the problem is, family members and listeners alike, they are not marketable assets. You see, whenever the Treasury sells bonds to the public, the buyer loans the government the par value of the bond. In other words, real money changes hands. Now, in exchange for providing this money to the government, the buyer is entitled to receive semi-annual interest payments based on the coupon of the bond. So, if a buyer loans the government $1,000 at a coupon rate of 3% for 10 years, the buyer will receive two payments of $15 each year for the next 10 years. Of course, once the bond matures, the buyer receives the last payment of $15 in addition to the return of the original $1,000 loan amount, which is the principal. Unfortunately, the last time the government used marketable bonds for Social Security was in 1980. Since then, the Treasury has issued non-marketable bonds, and they've done it very cleverly, and nobody's picked up on it. You see, a non-marketable bond is a security the Treasury sells to itself, but there's no exchange of money to make the loan. Notice this sleight of hand. In other words, the Treasury doesn't receive the par value of the loan from the Social Security Administration. Nevertheless, the Treasury obligates itself to pay the principal and semi-annual interest payments to the Social Security Administration. In economic terms, we say these bonds are unfunded. At present, the total unfunded liabilities of Social Security are $12.5 trillion. But since the $2.8 trillion of trust fund itself is also unfunded, the actual unfunded liabilities of Social Security grew to what? $15.3 trillion in 2016. That's a nearly 13% increase over the 2015 numbers. And worse than that, that amount will grow exponentially as the last of the baby boomers hit retirement. So where will the Treasury get the money for future benefits? The government will have to do what it does best, and that is beg, borrow, and steal. Mostly borrow, though. But at some point, the debt to GDP level will be such that no intelligent investor or government like China will ever consider buying our bonds. You see, the risk will be too high, not to mention the interest rate to find suckers dumb enough to buy them. So when that happens, the whole system will collapse. The whole system will come crashing down. So what does it all mean for those born after 1970? Well, if you have a desire to live out your golden years with dignity, you need to take your retirement planning into your own hands. Learn powerful strategies and techniques that will allow you to get P.A.I.D. as opposed to just waiting for social insecurity to pay you. Because your future absolutely depends on it.